interrupted. Thank you. Okay, so we're ready to go. 3, 2, 1.
Vanakkam, namaste, namaskar. Good afternoon to all and welcome to this very special COVID-19 Diwali celebrations Maha Sabha webinar. I am Nalini Moodley DR and I have the honor to be your host this afternoon and help you navigate through the various discussions that we're going to have. I have a long relationship with Hindu Mahasabha, and I'm honored that they requested me to host this webinar this afternoon. Like you, I am really looking forward to the discussions as they highlight critical times for Hindus as we approach Diwali, but it also highlights critical times for South Africa as we approach the looming threat of a second wave of COVID-19 infections. But whether you refer to the celebration as Diwali or Diwali, it is still a time of celebration. And it is a festival synonymous with fireworks displays, family celebrations, and numerous group feasts. But like everything else, it has been completely disrupted by the coronavirus pandemic, with family celebrations set to be impacted by the social distancing restrictions. And more importantly, it is a time when the proverbial good overcomes evil and light overcomes darkness. The world is in a particularly dark time, and there is much we can do to overcome, and much we must do to overcome this darkness. This is the moment for each of us to become collective fighters in this pandemic. While we pray, we must action our responsibility to overcome this crisis that has taken over the globe. Of course, there is the threat of becoming immune to the warnings of COVID and dropping our guard, and it is exactly what we must guard against. Further, there is a worrying growth of pandemic fatigue, and I'm sure you all see it and hear it daily as we're overwhelmed with statistics and warnings, and we simply have the overwhelming desire to go back to how life used to be. That dream of pre-COVID days of socializing and celebrating is still very attractive. And I'm also certain that while we are increasingly frustrated with this topic of conversation, and that might be so, the reality across the globe is that there is a dangerous surge in a second wave of COVID-19 infections in the US, in Italy, in Germany, and other countries across Europe. So we need strength and fortitude to hold up strong. The World Health Organization has warned about pandemic fatigue, and after months of restrictions and lockdowns, psychologists are also suggesting that people are longing for social contact and interaction. People are tired and frustrated and dropping their guard, and hence there's likely to be more risks, increasing the possibility of infection and spread. So it is against this background that we approach Diwali, and that the South African Hindu Mahasabha is hosting today this webinar titled COVID-19 Diwali and Fireworks, Tolerance, Cultural Rights and Responsible Use. There are two themed approaches today. The first theme of the webinar focuses on COVID-19 compliance, and as far as possible, the Mahasabha urges the community to avoid family gatherings and rather to have virtual Diwali celebrations and greetings. Temples are urged to comply with the Mahasabha's recommended COVID-19 regulations, and the Mahasabha supports social distancing, regular sanitizing, and wearing of masks. The second theme of the webinar focuses on the annual South African controversy, the use and abuse of fireworks. The focus will be on cultural rights and respect, as well as compliance and municipal bylaws. The Mahasabha is being proactive in trying to avoid the racial attacks and conflicts of previous years. To this end, the South African Hindu Sabha has a team of lawyers headed by Simrithi Sharma, who has generously volunteered to assist the community if there are racial attacks and conflicts. So let us now move on to the speakers of the day. We begin with a renowned scientist, Professor Salim Abdul Karim, who is a South African clinical infectious diseases epidemiologist, widely recognized for scientific contributions to HIV prevention and treatment. He is the director of the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa, Durban, and the Caprisa Professor of Global Health at Columbia University in New York. He is also an adjunct professor of immunology and infectious diseases at Harvard University, adjunct professor of medicine at Cornell University, and pro-vice chancellor research at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He is a fellow of the Royal Society. Professor Salim Karim is ranked amongst the world's most highly cited scientists by Web of Science. He serves on the boards of several journals, including the New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet Global Health, Lancet HIV, and MBio. He is the chair of the UN AIDS Scientific Expert Panel, the World Health Organization's HIV Strategic and Technical Advisory Committee, as well as the HBO-TB HIV Task Force. He is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board for Global Health at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He previously served as president of the South African Medical Research Council and previously served as the president, and Professor Karim is the chair of the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19. He is a member of the Task Force for Africa for Coronavirus and is also a member of the Lancet Commission on COVID-19. Professor Karim will this afternoon discuss current global and national trends in COVID-19 infections, concerns about the second wave, and the need for continued vigilance and compliance. I now will hand you over to Professor Abdul Karim.
Thank you very much, Nalini. Let me just say what a big honor it is for me to be here with you this afternoon. And when my friend and colleague Brij Maharaj wrote to me and said, can you please do this? I said, the one day in the week where I want to catch up with my sports and do my shopping and so on, and you want me to do this? I said, of course I'll do it, only with pleasure. So I want to take up the next 10 minutes to share with you, if I can get the first slide, I want to share with you where we are in the epidemic, in the COVID-19 epidemic in South Africa. And I want to talk about the risk of a second surge. What I want to do in this is I want to give you a perspective of the way in which we should look at our current situation. And I'm going to end off with 6 things I'd like you to keep in mind as you celebrate Diwali. Next slide. So if we look at the overall epidemic of COVID-19 in South Africa, we had our first case on the 5th of March. And in the first 3 weeks, the epidemic was growing rapidly. It was doubling every 2 days. But because of our very early action, declaring the state of disaster, closing schools, reducing gatherings, and then eventually instituting the lockdown, fortunately, from the 26th of March, the date of the lockdown, the epidemic started slowing down. So from doubling every 2 days, we went to doubling every 15 days. And that slowing down of the transmission of the virus at a community level was critical. Because if we didn't do that, we would have been in the midst of our surge, our peak in April. Instead, we pushed that back so that we had our peak only in July. And why was that important? Because by the time we had our peak in July, we had our field hospitals had been constructed. For example, the Cape Town ICC was a fully fledged 800-bed hospital with every bed being supplied with oxygen. We had ensured that there were adequate supplies of oxygen. We had to redirect oxygen that was being manufactured for commercial purposes to redirect that for medical purposes just during that peak. Otherwise, we would have been in the same situation as you would have heard of 2 weeks ago in India, where they ran out of oxygen. You run out of oxygen in this epidemic and people die. So we spent a lot of time during that opportunity that we had before the first peak in July preparing, so that by the time the peak came, most people were wondering, why wasn't this epidemic more severe? Why was it so, it didn't look so bad? Well, it didn't look so bad because we were better prepared. Well, after our peak in mid-July, the epidemic has come down. And as it has in most other countries, it comes down and reaches what we call a trough level, a level of low transmission. And we've done pretty well in getting our transmission down to a level that's regarded as low transmission, which is effectively less than 5 cases per 100,000 population per day. But it's been a bit concerning that since the 1st of October, we've seen a slow and steady rise. So should we be concerned about that? Let's look at that rise a little bit more carefully. Next slide. So when we look at 2 provinces in particular, the Free State and the Northern Cape, what you can see is that they went into their peak, but they haven't come back down to low transmission levels. They haven't come down below 5. In the Free State, it's still hovering at around 10. And in the Northern Cape, they never really had much of a peak. And it's been hovering between 15 and 20. So we are concerned that those 2 provinces haven't yet finished their first wave. And I've provided you with KwaZulu-Natal so that you can see in comparison what you would expect. You would expect a peak, you would expect it to come down, and then you would expect it to be at a low level. So compared to KwaZulu-Natal, the situation in the Free State and Northern Cape, they haven't come down yet to low transmission levels. And so we are waiting for that to happen, and we're working with them to see how best to speed that up. Next slide. But there are 2 provinces that are causing a bit of consternation. And those 2 provinces are the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. If you look at the Western Cape, that's the green line, you can see that they had their peak much earlier than the rest of us. Because remember that the epidemic took off first in the Western Cape. They came down to a low trough level below 5, but you can see what's been going on since the 1st of October. The green line is showing a bit of a trend towards going up, getting closer to 5. And the blue line, which is the Eastern Cape, you can see that what they've had is over the last week and a half, the epidemic has now been increasing in the Eastern Cape. In both these settings, these increases, there's a contributor to these increases in the form of mass gatherings that really are not allowed under the current regulations. So in the Western Cape, a large number of the cases, that little bump you see, is from the nightclub, Tin Roof in Claremont, where the school students spend the night inside the club in order not to go home during the curfew. And during that, they were drinking and dancing and so on, and they didn't follow the rules. And you had this huge outbreak among those students. In the Eastern Cape, this increase that you see is being driven at least partially by the outbreak that occurred in the nightclub with the Fort Hare students. So the Fort Hare students went to have a celebration at a tavern in the Eastern Cape on the 3rd of October, and then they went again on the 10th of October, and the virus has spread like wildfire among these students. So these students are now becoming a source of the virus and now leading to it spreading again in the Eastern Cape and Western Cape. So we are still a bit concerned. Again, I've given you KwaZulu-Natal as a comparison in the orange line. Next slide. So these 4 provinces are a bit of an issue for us. The 2 of them show a little bit of an increase. 2 of them, we're just waiting for them to recover and get back down to low levels. But the remaining 5 provinces, no problem. We have low transmission. And again, I put KwaZulu-Natal in there in the orange, so you can see how the other provinces compare. We're doing pretty well overall. Next slide. And so if we look at not just the black line, which is the number of cases, I also want to look at 3 other indicators. The first is the gray bars. The gray bars are the number of admissions that we have. These are COVID-19 admissions. And what you see is that our admissions rise as we get to our peak in July, and then our admissions have continued to decline. Right now, our admissions are still continuing to decline. In fact, last week, we hit a new low in terms of COVID-19 admissions. We went below 200 for the first time in a long while. So you get a sense of that even though the cases are going up slightly, we're not seeing that translating into an increase in admissions. Similarly, the red line with deaths, the number of deaths has been steadily coming down, and that continues to occur. And then finally, in the next slide, I'll take you to the last one, probably the most important indicator. And this is what proportion of the tests are positive. So you can see in the blue bars, this is the average number of tests being done each day. So you can see that over the last 3-4 weeks, we've been averaging between 19 and about 22,000 tests per day. That's the blue bars. Then when you look at the red bars, what you see over the last 3 to 4 weeks is that it's been consistently going down from 8.3, 8%, 8.1%, and now 7.7%. So that decline and the consistency of that decline gives you a lot of confidence that, in fact, we don't have a growing problem at the moment. We've done close to 5 million tests in total. Next slide. So let me answer the question. Is South Africa already in a second surge, or are we about to enter a second surge? Well, the answer is no, we are not. Based on the 3 key indicators, the number of cases, the proportion of tests that are positive, and the number of admissions we have for COVID-19. We have an issue in that 2 of our provinces show a slight rise. 2 of our provinces haven't even recovered from the first peak yet. But the overall trend, while it could suggest that we are in the early steps of a second surge, that's very unlikely to be the case. So we are at low transmission, and while testing continues to go up, we still have a positive proportion that's in a narrow band, and our admissions continue to decline. Next slide. So let me just quickly answer the question of, is South Africa going to have a second surge? Because we're seeing what's going on in Europe. I mean, the situation in Europe is dire. I was talking 2 days ago with my colleagues in Belgium, my equivalent, the scientific advisor in Belgium. And I mean, they've reached almost a state where they have no beds left in Belgium. Next slide. So are we going to have a second surge? What do we know about second surges? Well, in the 113 countries that we studied, we saw that 49 of them completed their first wave. Some are still in the first wave, some are sort of teetering along, but about half of all the countries have completed their first wave. Of the countries that have completed their first wave, half of them have already had a second wave. They've already had the second surge. Now, I don't refer to it as wave, because wave sounds, see, to get a second wave, you've got to end the first wave. You've got to get down to close to 0 or have no transmission, and then you get a next wave. What we have is that the first wave has gone down, but it might just come up again. So it's like a resurgence of the first wave. And so we're seeing that about half of all the countries that had a first wave have had a second wave. And of those that had a second wave, in half of them, the second surge was worse than the first surge. And it takes about 39 days to get from the peak of the first wave to the trough. And in South Africa, we did about that. And the timing of the second wave is at the time from the end of the first surge to the start of the second surge is 66 days. So technically, we are getting close to that point where we should expect that if we're going to get a second surge, it's going to come pretty soon. So if we follow these averages, we could be in a second surge sometime soon. The way the situation looks right now, though, I'm pretty confident that we are not imminently looking at a second surge. Next slide. But I remain concerned. I remain concerned that we are running the risk of a second surge. And there are three factors that are influencing that. The first is the challenge of complacency. You already heard me talking about this pandemic fatigue. I chose to use Mangena's diagram. This cartoon just says it so well. As we eased government restrictions, we were hoping that the population, the public, will continue and be fastidious about maintaining their personal mitigation measures, maintaining social distancing, wearing their masks, so that as the restrictions were less, the government restrictions are protecting you less and less. So you need to be more vigilant, and you need to be more careful about protecting yourself. But we're finding a lot of people are not following that rule. They're seeing, the reduction in restrictions as a reduction in their own restrictions. And then, of course, we got these super spreading events. And I took this picture from last week's Sunday Times of a party that the students were having. And that's really concerning. And then finally, I remain concerned about family gatherings. And as we look at living the new normal, I want to wish all of you a safe Diwali. And I want to make 6 suggestions for you, because I'm concerned that with Diwali, you will have gatherings that go across generations, that children will be meeting up with their parents and their grandparents, and that's a high-risk situation. So my 6 suggestions are, 1, keep the size of the gathering small. If you have a gathering of 15 people, that you have a much lower risk that somebody is infected than if you have a gathering of 40 people. So keep it as small as you can. Anybody who is ill, anybody with any symptoms, stay at home, go and have a test. Don't come to the family gatherings if you're sick. Have the gatherings outside preferably. Today it's raining, so it's not exactly the ideal day, but gatherings that are outside are much lower risk. Adhere to the social distancing. I know you want to hug people. I know you want to hug your grandparents. You really have to resist that for now. Avoid hugging, avoid handshaking. Stick with the namaste, clasped hands. Use a mask at all times except when eating and drinking. And then please, no buffets. Buffets are deadly for spreading this virus. We've had huge outbreaks in South Korea from buffets. So because so many people touch the same utensils in a buffet. So avoid buffets and no food queues without masks and social distancing. I want to wish you a wonderful Diwali and a safe Diwali. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Salim. It was such a wonderful time listening to you. And thank you for giving us such reassuring information, especially regarding the second surge. I think there was so much concern and fear around it. Not the second surge. You said we're not heading into a second wave, but possibly a second surge. I think I got that right. So thank you for that information. I think what it really highlights is that although we see numbers declining, we should not let our guard down. I think it's really important that we are empowered with the right kind of knowledge to make the right decisions. And you mentioned a really important thing. Family during this time is so critical, and people do want to hug grandparents and parents whom we haven't seen in a long time. But thank you very much. I think we all are aware that we should not embark on any careless behavior and should be more compliant. Thank you very much for your participation, Prof. Salim. It was such an honor to have you here with us.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and those of you watching, I think one of the critical things that we need to be made aware of is all that surrounds fireworks during Diwali. And before we go on to the next speaker, I think it's perhaps prudent for us to just go through a little bit of information regarding fireworks and the law. And I just want to read through quickly for you just some high-level overview of what the law says regarding fireworks. Municipal bylaws allow for fireworks to be set off during Diwali. However, there are conditions that residents must adhere to. For example, some of these include fireworks may not be set off in public places. This includes in parks or on pavements or streets. And do note that shopping malls, restaurants, liquor stores, and clothing retailers are also off limits. Fireworks may not be sold by street vendors or hawkers or at any informal open-air facility. Anyone who wishes to sell fireworks must be in possession of a valid license, which is issued by the Chief Inspector of the Department of Explosives. It is illegal to detonate fireworks within 200 meters of any hospital, clinic, petrol station, an old age home, nursing home, or animal welfare organization or institution. Further, no one under the age of 16 is allowed to purchase or set off fireworks. It is unlawful for any person to point or direct a firework at any other person, animal, building, or motor vehicle. Remember this, fireworks may only be set off in designated areas between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. on Diwali. Failure to comply with any of these could result in a hefty fine or even jail time. Low-hazard fireworks such as fountains, lawn lights, and sparklers can be lit in private homes. However, fireworks such as air bombs, supersonic bangs, sound shells, fountain whistles, and screeches are prohibited. So this is just a brief overview of the bylaws governing the use of fireworks. But we have today the privilege of listening to a law expert who will expand this area for us. It is an honor for me to introduce our next speaker, Professor Karthy Govender. Professor Govender is a barrister of the Middle Temple in England and an advocate of the High Court of South Africa. He holds law degrees from the UK, South Africa, and USA. Professor Govender won a Fulbright scholarship to the University of Michigan and was also the recipient of the Colenso Fellowship to St. John's College in Cambridge. He was a professor of law at the University of KwaZulu-Natal for more than 20 years, was appointed to the South African Human Rights Commission by President Mandela in 1995, and reappointed for a second term in 2002 by President Mbeki. He is currently a senior arbitrator with the South African Local Government Bargaining Council, and in addition, he has acted as a judge for the High Court for 6 years between 2011 and 2020. He serves on the appeal panel of the Press Council of South Africa, and in 2019, he was appointed by President Ramaphosa to serve as a commissioner of the South African Law Reform Commission. Incidentally, as we approach 160 years of the arrival of indentured Indians in South Africa, it is worth mentioning that Professor Govender's paternal great-grandmother came to South Africa to work as an indentured laborer on the sugar plantations, and his parents ran a grocery shop in the Durban city centre for approximately 40 years. Professor Govender's presentation will focus on cultural rights and responsibilities, as well as on the consequences of hate speech. I now hand you over to Professor Govender.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm indeed privileged to be able to address you on this very important topic. Firstly, let me acknowledge the efforts of the Hindu Maha Sabha and Professor Brij Maharaj in particular in setting up this webinar. I think it's important for a number of reasons, but let me just give you one reason why I think these conversations are crucial in our society. It is most responsible for an organization like the Hindu Mahasabha to reflect on past events and past practices and take steps to prevent the sort of conflict that we saw in the past reoccurring. In a society like ours, it is vitally important to de-escalate and decrease conflict wherever and whenever we can, particularly amongst people living in the same neighborhood, in the same area. Conflicts could easily escalate into racial tensions and racial tensions into fairly violent reactions. So I think anticipating difficulties, talking about it, getting people to abide by pre-agreed principles and norms really is the best way of resolving this issue. And this conversation I see as part of that broader process. I want to essentially make three points in my brief presentation today. I want to talk a little bit about cultural rights. I want to talk a bit about other rights that are pertinent at this time. And finally, I want to reflect a bit about this concept of hate speech, which is particularly prevalent and important part of our dialogue in this country, and how we're trying to curb hate speech, and what the consequences are for people that engage in hate speech. So the first point I want to make is, and I will start on the premise that discharging fireworks is part and parcel of the celebrations that Hindus engage in for Diwali and Deepavali. There has been some argument made that this has been a recent practice, and that originally the bursting of fireworks was not part of this particular practice. The reality is that millions of people throughout the world see the discharge of fireworks as being indispensable to the celebration of this particular festival. And the question that the law asks in this context is do people who engage in this cultural practice subjectively see this as an essential part of their expression of their culture? And the answer must unequivocally be yes. So I will proceed on that premise. The next point I want to make is that we protect in our Constitution what the United Nations treaties at this point refer to as cultural liberties. Now we think it important to protect a person's right to engage in their language, their culture and their religion, because it brings them joy. It often when you do that, it enables them to be better citizens. They feel more attached to their moorings, and they're able to function better. So our Constitution, in two sections, Section 30 and Section 31 of the text, expressly protects the right of a person to exercise and enjoy their culture, religion and language as well. I will, for this purpose of this discussion, simply focus on cultural rights. Now, what is important, and it has to be borne in mind, that the section then goes on to say that everyone has a right to use the language and to participate in the cultural life of their choice, but no one exercising these rights may do so in a manner inconsistent with any provision of the Bill of Rights. So it's quite important to understand that while cultural rights are protected in the Constitution, rightly so, but you've got to have regard to the fact that cultural rights, that the exercise of cultural rights may infringe the rights of other persons. And I want to talk about that in a minute. So what do we do? We say that if a person cannot or is not permitted to exercise their cultural rights, then that amounts to discrimination. Because the Constitution, Section 9, subsection 3 says there shall not be unfair discrimination on the basis of culture. And the courts are clear that not allowing a person to engage in the cultural practice of their choice amounts to discrimination. The next question that then emerges is it unfair discrimination? And it is important to realize that the Bill of Rights binds state actors, all the organs of state, etc. But in certain circumstances, it also binds private persons. So, for instance, a gated community. A gated community cannot just say to someone, you cannot engage in your cultural practices. The position is much more complicated than that. Many people living in gated communities appear to take the view that this is their community, they can make the rules, and they can prevent people engaging in their cultural practices. So many years ago, I had a case where a person lived in a very upmarket gated community, and he put up a Janda flag. And the community then got back to him to say, we're very sorry, no flags of any description are allowed to be exhibited on the property. And his brief to me was, look, I believe in this deity, I believe in this God, and no matter what it takes, even if we go to the Constitutional Court, we're going to fight them on this issue, because I believe my very success, the very essence of my being is tied to my worship of this deity. Now, the way a law deals with those sorts of issues is to say, in that particular community, there has to be a reasonable accommodation of the cultural beliefs of people. Now, reasonable accommodation means that you must reasonably accommodate people. You must not impose an undue burden on the community as a consequence of accommodating the beliefs of the individual. How do we define the issue of undue burden? We say, is there a legitimate objective you're seeking to achieve? Secondly, are the means that you use to restrict the right of the person linked to achieving that legitimate objective? And finally, we ask the question, are there less restrictive means of achieving your objective? Those are important factors. Going back to my Janda flag illustration, the community needs to say it's for these reasons that we don't want you to display the Janda flag. Somehow they've got to justify it. And then they've got to say that their prohibition is linked to that. And finally they've got to say that they cannot achieve their objective through any other means that intrudes on the person's right less. Now, that's quite a high standard. And so people that live in gated communities have to think about these issues. They have to reflect on it. And merely saying, well, you're living in our area is deeply offensive. There's no our area, there's no hierarchy of cultures. We establish equality as one of the guiding principles. And so there has to be some recognition that we are living in a society that values individual worth. Now, so that's part of culture, and not allowing people to exercise their culture, in all probability, will amount to unfair discrimination. But, as I indicated at the outset, and this is the second point I want to make, you cannot exercise that right in a way that unjustifiably infringes other people's rights. And as a human rights commissioner and as an acting judge, some of the more difficult cases that I had to adjudicate upon is to determine how you handle instances where there are clashes of rights. Now, what we've got to understand is that when you discharge fireworks, it does traumatize animals. It has a very significant effect on dogs and cats, etc., because the sound in their ears is amplified greatly. And people that love their pets become very upset at what is going on. And so there are rights. There are very important interests on the other side of the scale that we have to weigh. And what the state has done is that in trying to balance this, they've agreed on certain principles. And the principles that have been agreed upon is that you can only discharge fireworks during the window period, where they have a set period, a number of hours, that certain firecrackers are prohibited. All these big bangs, etc., they clearly are prohibited. And what we are trying to do in that way is to achieve a proper balance between people's rights to exercise and engage in their culture and other people's rights not to be seriously traumatized by what is happening. And one of the reasons why we've had conflict as a result of the Diwali celebrations and the bursting of fireworks is that the regulatory agencies have not enforced the regulations. Now, the inspector of explosives need to ensure that those that import these big bangs in violation of the regulations are prosecuted, charged, and fined. The police have to ensure that people that do not abide by the regulations, the window period in which to discharge the fireworks, are similarly charged. Now, it is that lack of action, I think, that has resulted in people believing that the law does not apply and is not going to be enforced, and that has resulted in the conflict. People who feel deeply aggrieved by their neighbors disobeying the law are requested to report that immediately to the police. We have a law in place. This is a society governed by the rule of law. If people do not respect it, then there must be sanction. There must be some consequence to that. If we follow that, then the conflict that occurs subsequently can be seriously reduced. The law as it stands now is not unreasonable. It's an attempt to balance the right of persons to exercise their culture and the right of other people not to be seriously traumatized. And it is vitally important that we do this. I, when I was in the Human Rights Commission, had to deal with issues of this nature, and I recall once having to mediate between a community in a gated community and a person who wanted to exercise his right to their cultural practices. And the way we resolved the issue, after some animosity and antagonism, was to impress on the people that the applicant in that case had the right to engage in that cultural practice. And it wasn't a case of we are allowing him to come and stay on our estate, so he must follow our rules. The Constitution is the highest law in the land. But by the same token, we had to tell the applicant, the people in that area have a right not to be traumatized. They have a right to the quiet enjoyment of the property. So we need to balance it. And the way we did it was we agreed very strictly that there would be no big bangs, that the fireworks that he would buy would be for illumination and other purposes, and that there were strict time limits within which he discharged them. And that settlement worked reasonably well. So let me talk a little bit about hate speech. Now, what tends to happen is people deeply frustrated attack their neighbors, and it often degenerates into ugly racist statements being made on both sides. The end result is that people are in the equality courts. So we have the Equality Act, the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, which prohibits hate speech. Now, it's a convoluted definition in the Act, but the Supreme Court of Appeals has redefined the offense to say it's not an offense, hate speech as the advocacy of hatred based on race, gender, ethnicity, religion, and sexual orientation that amounts to the incitement to cause harm. Now, harm is defined quite broadly. Harm is defined as physical harm, but also psychological harm. If you undermine a person's dignity so much that it affects them psychologically, then that could amount to harm. But leaving aside the legal issues, the challenge that you face subsequently to people living together after one person engages in hateful comments and the other person responds is very significant. Rather than confronting people, even if they're violating the law, it's best to get the law enforcement agencies involved. So we we go through this period, and I do not like to use the word tolerance, because tolerance appears to suggest that you're almost holding your nose and accepting it. I think there have been a number of judgments of the Constitutional Court which talks about celebrating diversity, recognizing our differences, and recognizing that we can acknowledge other people's cultural practices without in any way demeaning ours. We can simply live in a society where we respect each other. And if we show that respect for each other, then conflicts do not arise. It's only when we somehow feel that the culture of someone else is inferior to ours that it's more difficult to show respect. So I urge all people during this time to understand that what the law seeks to do is to balance conflicting rights. And if you do not abide by the law, then you're not only violating the law, but you're violating rights that other people have, and you're almost inciting them to respond. So please, during this period, let's have a great time. Let's enjoy this. I thoroughly enjoy the Diwali celebrations. But let's understand that we live in a community and we have some responsibilities as a consequence. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and Vanakkam, God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Professor Govender. That was really a wonderful presentation, and it gave us so much to think about. I think really some of the issues that resonated with me was recognizing that our rights come with responsibilities, and while we have a range of those rights and responsibilities, cultural rights and the attached discriminatory practices that go with it is something that we must be aware of and reflect on. I suppose we must also ensure that while we're celebrating these during these times, we must be compliant in whatever way possible. But your presentation today also has empowered us as lay people to understand our rights and to understand those of others, and the right for us to celebrate but not bring harm or trauma to others around us. But I think one thing that we must remember is the reason we celebrate with fireworks is to light up the dark night and illuminate the dark night. But rather than illuminate the dark night with beautiful light, it seems that often the practice is with loud bangs. So maybe we must revert to going back to celebrating with beautiful fireworks, some of which don't make much of a noise. So let's try to develop a culture where we celebrate each other and we are celebrating in our diversity. Thank you so much, and I hope you're all watching, you're enjoying the presentations as we proceed. Our next speaker is Pandit Lokesh Maharaj, who is also no stranger to the Hindu community. Dr. Lokesh Ramnath Maharaj is a senior lecturer in curriculum and education studies in the School of Education at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He holds qualifications in Hindi and Sanskrit and a master's and PhD in education. He is also a practicing priest and a sought-after expert on Hindu scriptures and its relevance in South Africa. Pandit Lokesh Maharaj is chair of the Priests' Council of the South African Hindu Maha Sabha and an executive member of the Sri Sanatan Dharma Sabha of South Africa. Today, Pandit Lokesh will speak on fireworks as an integral part of Diwali celebrations. I now hand you over to Pandit Lokesh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Moodley. Namaste, Vanakkam, and Sawubona to all people who are tuned in at the moment. As Professor has indicated, I'm going to present today on fireworks as an integral part of Diwali celebrations. There is a close link between culture and religion. Most religious groups have certain cultural practices that cannot be traced back to scriptures. Fireworks have become an integral part of Diwali celebrations. Indeed, fireworks for a long time have been part of Guy Fawkes and New Year celebrations. Yet, there is no evidence in scriptures that Guy Fawkes' own New Year should be celebrated with fireworks. Hindus have been celebrating happy occasions like Diwali, Holi, Ramnavami, etc., with great pomp, making use of the resources available. As time changed, the methods of celebrations have been adapted to changing times while not losing sight of the inner meaning of the occasion. For example, in earlier times, drums and simple musical instruments were used in playing celebratory music. In present times, modern instruments such as the guitar, bongo drums, and other Western instruments are commonly used in Hindu celebrations. Fireworks are a part of Indian culture. Dr. Gustav Oppert, a German Indologist and respected authority on fireworks, informs us that the sage Vaishampayan in the Niti Prakashika mentioned gunpowder. In a book entitled Military Advancement in Ancient India, Dr. Gustav writes, the invention of gunpowder has been ascribed to different individuals belonging to different countries. And as the question as to its authorship and antiquity is still an open one, we shall discuss this mooted point and shall endeavor to prove that the oldest documents mentioning and describing gunpowder are found in India and written in Sanskrit, and that the use of gunpowder and its application to discharge of missiles from projectile weapons was a well-known fact in ancient India, corroborating so far the opinion of those who always pointed out India as the original seat of its invention. The question whether China received the knowledge of gunpowder from India or vice versa cannot be touched here, as there do not exist any trustworthy documents bearing on this question. No Chinese work on this question can, with respect to antiquity, be compared with the Shukraniti, so that even if the Chinese should have independently invented gunpowder, the claim as to the priority of invention will certainly remain with India. The Kautilya Artha Shastra speaks of Agni Churna. Agni Churna is a powder that creates fire. Agni Chur is the saltpetre or potassium nitrate, which together with gunpowder is a significant constituent of fireworks. Saltpetre has a characteristic purple flame. Hence, fireworks were used for not only military, but aesthetic celebratory purposes as well. Alchemists experimented on saltpetre, and Chinese texts dating back to the 7th century mentions the usage of saltpetre enclosed in a bamboo tube to create loud explosions. Kaushik Roy, in a book entitled Military Transition in Early Modern Asia, writes, a Chinese text, which can be dated to the 7th century CE, mentions that the people of Northwest India were aware of the existence of saltpetre and its use in producing purple flames. In 3rd century CE China, saltpetre and sulfur were mixed by alchemists. The Chinese believed that explosions from fireworks could keep evil spirits at bay. As the Chinese continued to innovate further with sparklers, light fountains, and rockets, they quickly sensed the business opportunity and began to export them to Europe and India. By the 16th century, fireworks had become one of the major sources of entertainment for Indian royalty. There is evidence that the British in India used fireworks of all shapes and forms during the 17th and 18th century. Fireworks have certainly been a part of all celebrations, including Diwali, for at least 2000 years. The Bhagavad-Gita is one of the important scriptures that Hindus follow. The Bhagavad-Gita cannot refer to the use of fireworks during Diwali or at any other time, since this is not the topic of discussion therein. The Bhagavad-Gita talks about the performance of one's dharma or duty. In his message, Sri Krishna, the main protagonist in the Bhagavad-Gita, teaches ahimsa or non-injury to all beings. From this, we can infer that our celebrations should not cause injury to any living entity, including animals. The controlled use of fireworks will not go against the Bhagavad Gita and Hindu scripture. It is not necessary to ban the use of fireworks during Diwali. What is required is the effective implementation of bylaws, rules, and regulations so that the use of fireworks is controlled. And this control would be similar to the rules that are in place for the consumption of alcohol, speeds of motor vehicles, and the sale of specific medication. According to the Durban municipality bylaws, fireworks can only be lit from sunset on the days of Diwali until midnight. We are further advised that only low hazard fireworks such as fountains, lawn lights, and sparkles can be lit in our private homes. The bylaw also called for children under 16 years of age to be appropriately supervised by an adult when letting off fireworks. Those of us who are pet owners should ensure that our pets are fitted with a collar with an identification tag which states their home address and telephone number. Now, the Constitution of South Africa states that everyone has the right to freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion. One may therefore argue that it is a constitutional right to light fireworks on Diwali. However, we need to understand that with rights comes responsibilities. While one may have the right to light fireworks during Diwali, one is expected to do so in a responsible manner. One's enjoyment of fireworks should not cause distress to senior citizens in our communities, bring discomfort to animals in our surroundings, or unnecessarily disturb the peace of our neighbors. To do any of the aforementioned would go against the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and Sanatan Dharma. Therefore, let us exercise our constitutional right in a way that adheres to the principle of ahimsa. The Sanatan scriptures abound with verses that encourage us to revere sacred rivers, mountains, forests, and animals. We note that many followers of the Hindu Dharma love to be close to nature. There is a strong belief among the adherents of Hindu Dharma that all living beings are sacred because they are parts of God, and they therefore should be treated with respect and compassion. We are all familiar with how Sri Krishna treated cows as divine. As we enjoy the different types of fireworks during Diwali, let us keep in mind the Hindu view on preserving the environment. Fireworks cannot be recycled, and therefore they need to be disposed of appropriately in the black bin bags. It is every Hindu's dharma to ensure that fireworks do not cause harm to our environment. I want to wish everyone a prosperous Diwali, and may all your wishes be granted. Namaste, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pandit Lokesh, for those very informative words. I think we've all are on a serious learning curve today, and you've reiterated the value of our rights and responsibilities as Hindus celebrating Diwali, and also recognizing that in the scripture there are a mention of these celebratory fireworks. But while doing so, we must recognize the sacredness of all those beings around us. So thank you so very much for your wise words this afternoon. We really enjoyed your presentation. We have a final, and as we conclude, a final speaker this afternoon, who is Advocate Ranjiv Mergen. Advocate Ranjiv Mergen is a member of the Society of Advocates practicing from Advocates Chambers in Pietermaritzburg. As a student, he was chairperson of the Hindu Students Association at the Natal University, a youth member of the South African Hindu Sabha, a member of the National Hindu Youth Federation and Midlands Hindu Society. He is currently the president of the Midlands Hindu Society. He is also the chairperson of the Mzunduzi Crematorium and Cemeteries Concerned Citizens Committee. Advocate Mergen is a council member of the South African Hindu Sabha and will this afternoon summarize the presentations made and draw some important conclusions. I now welcome Advocate Mergen.
Thank you, Professor Moodley, for those kind words. I indeed have a very exciting responsibility of summarizing these profound words of our eminent professors and Pandit Lokesh Maharaj. I think I'll start with the last presentation by Panditji, who very eloquently put it that fireworks have been with us for over 2,000 years. He has been able to find scriptural injunctions to prove that the written descriptions of fireworks or the earliest records of fireworks have been in Indian scripts, in Sanskrit, and that was well researched by Dr. Gustav, who found that sage Vaishnav Payam mentioned gunpowder at a very early age. So in later texts, the Chinese mentioned gunpowder and explosive materials being used in northern India. But what Panditji has also mentioned is that there must be responsible use of fireworks. And with this right to use fireworks comes responsibility. And I think that was also very well covered when Nalini highlighted the different responsibilities that there are for fireworks. And I think it's important for us to look at the fact that every municipality has its own bylaws and guidelines for the use of fireworks. And although eThekwini has a particular set of fireworks bylaws, Msunduzi, which covers Pietermaritzburg, has its own sets of bylaws. And like that, across the country in Gauteng, there are different bylaws. And I think we as the Maha Sabha will make some effort to ensure that we get as many bylaws as possible and make that available to the public so that our community is fully aware of their rights and responsibilities, where and when they can use fireworks. So the general principles in terms of fireworks is that it's illegal to detonate fireworks within 200 meters of any hospital, clinic, petrol station, or old age home, nursing home, or any animal welfare center or institution. Now, that applies across the board. But in terms of where you may use your fireworks, whether it can be in your private property or at a designated area, and the times for you to use those fireworks is regulated by municipal bylaws. And I'm fortunate that Maha Sabha has the eThekwini bylaws. The Msunduzi bylaws are available as well. And I think we'll ensure that we get those bylaws for Gauteng because there have been some serious problems when it comes to hate speech and things. I think I'll go on then to look at what Professor Karthy Govender had to say. Professor, I think the Maha Sabha will definitely make available Professor's talk via the Facebook channel. So for those of us who missed some of his talk due to some sound issues, we'll be able to look at, listen to the great insight that he put. But I think what's very important and what the professor highlighted was that we have a cultural right that is entrenched in our constitution. We are allowed to use fireworks, and no one can deny us that right. But with that right to use fireworks comes responsibilities. So we have to adhere to the bylaws. The prevalence of gated communities that most of our people are now living in also seems to have their own set of rules, which seems to want to infringe on our rights to celebrate our cultural practices, including the bursting of fireworks. And unfortunately, I think now that we are equipped with these sets of laws, as well as information provided by Professor Govender, it will help us to give those body corporates who regulate the activities in gated communities some advice on how Diwali should be celebrated within those communities as well. And I think for a long time, many of the residents in gated communities have been shying away because they didn't want to upset the apple cart in those communities. But we're armed with these rights, obviously acting in a responsible manner. Those Hindus that are living in those gated communities can now take on this issue with their body corporates. I think it's also very important that when we use our fireworks during Diwali, responsibility has to be emphasized. Also, we need to avoid hate speech because the consequences of hate speech results in criminal action being taken against members. So I think it's absolutely important. Besides that, as Hindus, we promote equality, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the whole world is one family, and the differences that we have are very subtle, but at the same time, we need to respect everyone. We can't be saying Vasudeva Kutumbakam in one breath and in the next breath going and engaging in hate speech with people. I think what was very interesting and enlightening was Professor Salim Karim, who is most definitely the authority when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, not only in South Africa, but across the world. And his presentation, I think to a large extent, put us at ease. He very eloquently put out the message that South Africa was able to manage the fallout from the pandemic because we got there early. The government was able to put in protective measures in March, which allowed the lockdown, which allowed the pandemic to be controlled. And by the time we got to our peak, because of that controlled state that we were in, the country was ready to deal with that peak. And that is why we didn't see the fallouts that you're seeing in US and in Europe. Now that we are seeing a decline in the infection rate, it has stabilized. We don't see a second wave coming, but it's not fully out of, South Africa is not fully out of the woods. We have to be responsible in the way we behave. So at the Maha Sabha, we are advocating that you always wear your mask, you sanitize, and you keep social distancing. Now, Professor also suggested that in terms of our Diwali celebrations, there is no way we can avoid contact with people, but let's limit that. Let's ensure that we keep our sizes of gatherings as minimal as possible if we want to engage in any gatherings. He suggested a number of 15, but he also mentioned something that's very important, that when we have our Diwali gatherings, we're going to have members or family members from across the age spectrum together. And that means sometimes asymptomatic youngsters might bring that virus into the family environment where you have seniors above the age of 60 and 70. And we must be very cautious about that. So let's avoid, if we're going to meet, let's avoid any hugging or shaking of hands. And let's follow that Hindu tradition of namaste, clasping our hands together and greeting each other in that respectful manner. Also, keep the mask on. Although you are familiar with the people that are in that vicinity with you, keep the mask on at all times until you have to eat or consume something, and then put it back on thereafter. So I think it's very important. Avoid the buffets, avoid the queuing. That is the message, but go ahead by all means, celebrate and enjoy your Diwali, but do it responsibly. Remember, it's not only about protecting ourselves, but it's protecting the people we love. When we go out and give our parcels to our friends and neighbors, those are people that we love and respect, and we want to ensure that they're going to be with us after Diwali as well. So in the interest of protecting our family and friends, we need to act in a responsible manner. I think the message that's come out of this webinar is that we all have to act in a responsible manner, whether it's the way we celebrate Diwali, in terms of how we interact with our people, family members and friends and neighbors. When it comes to the way we use fireworks, we've had several issues regarding fireworks from across the country. Facebook certainly lights up when it comes to Diwali and fireworks. The other celebrations like Guy Fawkes and New Year's and Christmas, when the fireworks are used, don't seem to have that much attention. But I think it's important that we, at the end of the day, must be responsible Hindus who will ensure that we follow the bylaws and also publish the bylaws so that our neighbors who may not be Hindu are fully aware that we are within our rights to do what we are doing. I think that was the best summary I could do under the circumstances. I do appeal to the Maha Sabha to please put out the video by Professor Karthy Govender so that all the people may have a reference to what our rights and responsibilities are in terms of our cultural practices and religious practices. Thank you very much, and happy Diwali to all of you.
Thank you so much, Advocate Mergen. I think you've summed it up very well in terms of all our speakers and lifted out the key issues that we need to really consider during this time. I think what we have come now to the end of the webinar, and it is my duty as host to conclude by recognizing all those who have contributed to the success of today's presentations. I'm sure that having joined us and have spent this last hour, you have embarked on a significant learning curve. Hopefully we did not add to your COVID-19 fatigue, but have empowered you to manage the future more responsibly. These presentations, I hope, as they have for me, whet my appetite towards embarking on further research and other presentations to dive deeper into the real issues that have been raised here today. Finally, as we light these fireworks, and a lot has been said about responsibility and rights, but as we light these fireworks and light our diyas and clay lamps during Diwali, let's be particularly vigilant with regards the use of our alcohol-based hand sanitizer. It has created a lot of chaos when you are lighting a lot of flames, having just sanitized your hands. So let's manage that more carefully. Let's ensure there are no real burn victims, that our children are protected, and that those dangers are really managed in all our households. We have now come to the vote of thanks, and there are lots of people that I need to thank. First, I'd like to thank all our distinguished speakers who took time off their busy schedules to participate in this COVID-19 Diwali and Fireworks webinar. The media, Hinvani, Lotus FM, The Post and Rising Sun, Kiran Singh and his team from Designer Works, Dinesh Naidu and Niresh Siyasankar from Serendipity Corporate. And finally, I'd also like to thank the South African Hindu Maha Sabha for their initiatives in bringing these webinars to the community to support our growth and development as far as empowering us on an ongoing basis. With those few words, I want to say Vanakkam, Namaste, Namaskar, and have a lovely weekend further. Thank you for spending this hour with us.